Towards the end of the 1990s, British Airways undertook a massive refurbishment of its image in order to suit the perceived social change away from the straight-laced corporate look of the 1980s, and thus chose to invest in Project Utopia, better known as the World Livery or Ethnic Livery, a series of colour schemes implemented to represent nations served by the UK carrier. However, what resulted was one of the biggest public relations disasters in aviation history, and one that was seen to take the British flag out of Britain's flag carrier, a fact noted and exploited by the airline's rivals, while the legacy of Project Utopia's failure would be one that would linger with the company for years following its withdrawal. By 1990, British Airways had come a long way since its formation as the unified flag carrier of the UK, following the merger of the previous international carrier, the British Overseas Airways Corporation, and domestic carrier British European Airways, the company, as formed, being a severely loss-making operation, primarily due to mismanagement, government interference, union squabbling, and the use of a motley fleet of inherited airliners. Therefore, the nationalised carrier spent most of the 1970s attempting to revitalise its image in order to win over much-needed business passengers, hoping that the prestige of Britain's flag airline, together with the start of Concorde operations in 1976, would put the firm back on the world stage. Constrained by the government and saddled with militant airline unions, it wouldn't be until the process of privatisation began in 1981 that the company's new chairman, Sir John King, and CEO Colin Marshall were able to reverse the fortunes of the struggling giant to give it the appeal it desired. In 1984, a complete refresh of the airline's image was undertaken upon the launch of the Landor livery, a crisp corporate look developed by the San Francisco-based brand consultancy Landor Associates, that was in line with the business-orientated mindset of the decade, while onboard service was improved substantially in order to present passengers with an unbeatable travel experience. Older aircraft, such as the Hawker Siddeley Trident and the Vickers VC-10, were replaced by state-of-the-art Boeing 757s and Airbus A320s, and from what had previously been a near-constant loss supported almost entirely by state funding, British Airways was now one of the most profitable airlines in the world, adopting the bold slogan of the world's favourite airline. From here, the company went from strength to strength, introducing brand new Boeing 747-400s, 767s and 777s on long-haul routes to replace Lockheed TriStars and Douglas DC-10s, while the Concorde operation had become a status symbol for the celebrity-driven 1980s, the must-have mode of transport for the super-rich. However, by the mid-1990s, the notion of a straight-laced, corporate-led world began to be replaced by a more humanitarian, people-orientated view, endemic of the 90s grunge era, and moves towards environmental and multicultural considerations, with the wealth and affluence of the previous decade now seen as severely out of step. After 13 years as CEO, Colin Marshall was replaced by Robert Ayling in 1996, who desired the image of British Airways to represent a more global, approachable and cosmopolitan outlook, rather than the big business manner of the previous decade, and thus set to work designing a brand with a common identity, removing the iconic Landor livery that had become an endemic symbol of organisation and national character. At a cost of £60 million, of which £2 million was paid to artists and the Newell and Sorrell design firm, the initial rollout was to consist of 15 distinct tail art designs that were described as brave, expressive and gleeful, with June 10, 1997, seeing the new image unveiled as one of the largest corporate rebranding exercises in history, with the company's entire fleet of aircraft, vehicles, stationery, catering and uniforms to receive this dynamic look. The changes were far more than cosmetic though, as this image was also to introduce a new culture to British Airways in order to incorporate a global and caring approach through new management and customer service training programs, and the fundamental basis of the ethnic liveries was to essentially become a world airline whose headquarters happened to be in Britain. Going under the title Project Utopia, the final 35 liveries chosen for the scheme were Nalanji Dreaming, Water Dreaming and Wanala Dreaming for Australia, Animals and Trees for Botswana, Whale Rider for Canada, Wings for Denmark, Crossing Borders for Egypt, Blue Pool, Chelsea Rose and Colour Down the Side for England, La Pyramide de Louvre for France, Avignon, Bavaria, Gothic and Sterntaler for Germany, Rendezvous for Hong Kong, Paithani for India, L'Esprit Liberté as an unspecified international variant, Kong for Ireland, Waves and Cranes for Japan, Delft Blue Daybreak for the Netherlands, Koguchi Lojce for Poland, Spring for Romania, Golden Kokama for Russia, Yom Al-Suk for Saudi Arabia, Benihon for Scotland, Debeli Emily and Debeli Martha for South Africa, Blomsterang for Sweden, and Waves of the City for the United States, while 5 colours were dedicated for the United Kingdom as a whole: British Blend, Teaming Up for Britain, to celebrate the 2000 Sydney Summer Olympics, Grand Union, Pause to Remember, and Chatham Dockyard, the latter being originally a unique choice for the airline's fleet of 7 Concords. Project Utopia was considered by the British Airways management to be a refreshing philosophy on the concept of a national carrier, and with 60% of the airline's business being with foreign markets, the scheme was expected to have a very low risk of failure, intending to embrace the world citizen while relinquishing loyalty to the notion of Britishness. Upon its launch, though, British Airways were dealt a severe public relations blow, as feedback against the ethnic liveries was severe, primarily stemming from the British market. Aside from a general confusion as to what the abstract art pieces were meant to represent, the drive by British Airways to remove its ties to Britishness was seen by the UK public as an insult, with critics citing that other flag carriers, such as Air France, KLM and Japan Airlines, clearly embraced their own national character in order to give their product an image that was unique to their respective countries. Even outside the UK, the ethnic liveries were met with ridicule, as a primary selling point of the British Airways brand was the company's association with an organisation charm that was unique to Great Britain, and thus attempting to discard this image was deemed as a shallow and contrived desire to appeal to fleeting modern trends, rather than maintaining a more timeless outlook, with the biggest pushback against the scheme being from business travellers on the lucrative transatlantic routes between Britain and America. At the 1997 Conservative Party conference, former Prime Minister Margaret Thatcher showed her displeasure by draping a handkerchief over a model of a British Airways Boeing 747 displaying the animals and trees tail fin, and openly criticised the Project Utopia scheme as it took away the identity of the UK's flag carrier. Air traffic controllers also had difficulty visually identifying British Airways flights due to the ethnic liveries being hard to recognise as company aircraft when compared to the outgoing Landor colours, thus leading to frequent misidentification during taxi operations and a general confusion between controllers and pilots. The biggest signal as to the scheme's failure, however, was when the rival Virgin Atlantic, also undergoing a brand refresh, added the Union flag to the winglets of its Airbus A340s and Boeing 747s, declaring that they were now the UK's flag carrier, which only served to boost their massive expansion into new markets throughout the early 2000s. Of the liveries designed for Project Utopia, the only colour scheme that received a modest level of praise was the Chatham Dockyard design used on Concorde, as it gave a stylised representation of the Union flag and was largely in keeping with the British theme. Therefore, in 1999, Ailing announced that those aircraft still in Landor livery would adopt the Chatham Dockyard colours, while those already in ethnic colours, around 170 members of the fleet, would continue to wear their respective Utopia scheme for the foreseeable future. With the failure of Project Utopia came resignations and replacements among the airline's management, with Chris Holt, marketing chief and lead on the £60 million campaign, resigning in October 1999, while Robert Ailing himself, after protracted union disputes following the launch of the non-unionised British Airways low-cost subsidiary, Go Fly, in 1998, was replaced as CEO by Rod Eddington in March 2000, but received a £2 million payoff upon his departure. The ethnic liveries, meanwhile, were gradually phased out in favour of the Chatham Dockyard scheme, following the end of the campaign in May 2001, and by 2006 only 3 aircraft continued to sport ethnic colours: former British Mediterranean Airways Airbus A320-231, Golf Mike Echo Delta Alpha, which wore the Whale Rider livery until it was sold to Indian Airlines in May 2006, and 2 BA Connect de Havilland -8 311s, Golf Bravo Romeo Yankee Uniform in Benihon Tartan, and Golf Bravo Romeo Yankee Victor in Irish Colm, both of which lost these liveries when they were sold to Flybe in March 2007. The Chatham Dockyard livery, meanwhile, has become the modern face of the carrier, although an Airbus A319 and 3 Boeing 747s were repainted into retro liveries in 2019 as part of the centenary celebrations, these including 2 747s in the preceding Landor livery of 1984 and the original 1974 Negus livery, but also the colours of the airlines that were merged in 1974 to create British Airways, BOAC for the third 747 and BEA for the A319. As summarised by Eddington after the end of the Project Utopia scheme, the concept of creating an image that had a world appeal was not a fundamentally flawed idea, but the manner in which it was handled, and the fervent desire by the management to discard the British identity, meant that the airline's reputation as one of the world's most popular business carriers was severely hurt.